73 questions.
With Max.
Podcast.
Genetics.
Human.
Archaeology.
Denise Evans.
Spencer Wells.
Neanderthal.
Metabolism.
Ancestry.
Where in the world did we come from?
I am.
Unique.
DNA.
Genome.
Jeff Rose.
Monsoon. Nubian.
Debutage. From.
Sadiat.
Abu Dhabi.
Welcome to 73 Questions with Max, featured by Moog. This week, I am joined in the studio by three very special guests. Two cave people, THH288, who goes by the name of Betty, and HTT822, otherwise known as Agatha. A little later in the show, I'll explain exactly just how and why we are joined by these two very special guests. And our third guest this evening is Harrison Croft, a world-renowned paleoanthropologist and geneticist who was recently featured in National Geographic for his discovery of human bones in Antarctica. Our big question this week is, how do we know that humans living around the world today ultimately came from Africa? This really is one of my most favorite questions in the field, and I hope that ultimately, using the tools of science and evidence from the present, we'll be able to decipher the past. Well, Harrison Croft, it's lovely to have you here today in the studio.
Oh, just call me Harry.
Very nice to have you. I don't suppose we could start by, could you just introduce yourself to our listeners and tell them a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I am a paleoanthropologist and a geneticist. My work focuses on looking into our origins from Africa, and I've recently become rather famous because of my findings of the bones at Antarctica.
Wow, that's very exciting. I don't suppose you could... Well, obviously this week's theme, the big question we have this week is, how do we know that humans living around the world today ultimately came from Africa? I don't suppose you could perhaps enlighten us a little bit about that question.
Well, I can certainly try. I'm not sure how familiar your audience is with the details of genetics.
Just dumb it down a bit and do your best.
I'll try. So basically when people started to think about the origins of our species in Africa, one person stands out, and that's Charles Darwin.
Darwin, yes. Yeah.
In his The Descent of Man, he writes about when observing extinct species in the different regions of the world, how they are often related to the current species living in those regions. This kind of thinking led him to think that perhaps because of our proposed relationships to apes and gorillas, and we know that they originate in Africa, perhaps we also originate in Africa as well.
Well, how do we know that monkeys actually originated in Africa?
Well, a lot of fossil sites from the early and middle Miocene, which is tens of millions of years ago, tell us this information. But we are sure that the great ancient apes come from Africa.
Oh, okay.
But during that time period, that was only circumstantial evidence. People really didn't have proof for that we actually originate in Africa. Only recently, with the development of technology such as genetics and biotechnology, were we able to sequence our own DNA and look at...
Stop you there. I
Sure.
think for some of our listeners may not be so familiar with the terminology as we are of hereditary.
Sure. DNA is a molecule found in most of our cells and in living being cells, letters A, T, C, and G,
Right.
in a certain pattern. And that pattern really defines how you develop since conception. And not only does it do that, it all from your mom. So by looking at your DNA, we can trace back to your parents, and then from...
So you're saying that DNA is this code which is in all of us and is passed down from our parents, you're saying?
Pretty much.
Oh, interesting.
And not only is it hereditary, it also defines important characteristics of who you are.
Oh, okay.
So, two big projects that told us that we originate in Africa using this revolutionary new technique of sequencing DNA were the mitochondrial Eve project and the Y chromosomal atom. The mitochondrial Eve project tried to sequence a part of your DNA located in your cells, which is called mitochondrial DNA. And
sorry, could I just stop you there? What exactly is mitochondrial Eve?
well, mitochondrial Eve basically is the common ancestor we've found of all humans, tracing back on the motherhood line, the matrilineal lineage. That's because you get your mitochondria exclusively from your mother. And so by tracing mitochondrial DNA inheritance, you trace actually the matrilineal lineage back to the original ancestor.
I think I follow. Yes.
There were other. So mitochondrial Eve would have lived around 200,000 years ago, and from this person, all the mitochondrial DNA spread. So all humans today possess her mitochondrial DNA.
Passed down from that original Eve to
Yes.
subsequent generations.
That doesn't mean she was the only woman alive at that time. That just means the other women's DNA died out.
Oh, okay.
And as far as for Y chromosomal Adam is concerned, it's a similar thing, except now we're looking at the fatherhood line, the patrilineal lineage, which is the Y chromosomal DNA. Because it's much longer compared to mitochondrial Eve, which the paper was released in 1987. This one was released in 2000. The paper was released in 2000, and some of my good friends worked on it.
Good friends such as
Spencer Wells, great guy.
Spencer Wells. I think I've heard his name once or twice. Yeah, he's been around. So getting back to humans in leaving Africa, the main question.
So basically, yeah, genetics told us our matrilineal and patrilineal lineage originate in Africa because those African groups living today have the biggest divergence of that DNA, which means they've been around the longest because the DNA had a longer time to mutate. Yes. Basically, what we look at is not the whole sequence, but only the mutations, the changes, what makes you different from other people. And we call these changes markers. But genetics is not the only reason for why we think humans originate in Africa. We also use archaeology. Archaeological sites, the earliest of our hominid species, which is the part of the primate tree we belong to, have been found in Africa, such as the Homo erectus 1.85 million years ago.
Wow, that's a long time ago.
Yeah. And if you think about it, these beings traveled from Africa to all around the world 1.85 million years ago, which is, if you think about it today, it's quite hard for us as well to travel to Australia, for example. But these people have done it 1.85 million years ago.
They didn't fly by airplane or by boat, did they?
No, they didn't.
They walked the entire way, I guess.
Oh, yeah.
That's a long way. So
well, to Australia, they might have canoed as well.
Oh, they might have canoed. Oh, interesting. So when they left Africa, did they suddenly leave altogether at once? That's what it seems to sound like to me. Or is it more of a gradual process?
Well, it was more of a gradual process, and there was a lot of going back and forth migration. It wasn't that suddenly there was a great leap forward and suddenly all of them decided to leave Africa. It took probably many, many years and many flow-back migrations as well to accomplish this.
And so what was the reason for going back and leaving Africa? And
well, there is a theory that is not really for sure yet, but we believe that something called the Saharan pump might have made these ancient humans leave Africa. The Saharan pump is basically as our Earth revolves around the sun, it experiences perturbations in this revolution and wobbles. Although the Earth slightly wobbles, it has major consequences on our climate. We enter periods of ice ages and warm periods. It's like a cycle. And during one of those cycles, the Saharan desert expanded so much that it pushed certain people out of Africa while other people deeper into Africa.
But they left more than once. Am I correct in thinking?
Yes, we believe that there were 3 major migrations out of Africa. The first of the original, the earliest, Homo erectus, 1.85 million years ago, whose remains were not only found in Africa but also in Eurasia, Western and Eastern. Also, the second exodus was of what is more popularly known as Neanderthals and Denisovans. Neanderthals settled in Europe, today Europe, and Denisovans in northeastern Asia. And what is really interesting is that genetics tells us that we actually have a Neanderthal and Denisovan DNA in us.
Wow.
So if you are a European originating in Europe, you would have around 2% Neanderthal DNA.
Fascinating.
Yes, so as our ancestors in the third migration out of Africa moved out, they came to Europe, and it wasn't a simple they replaced the Neanderthals. No, they mixed with them, and that is what we see in the DNA.
So you've explained a lot about this multidisciplinary approach to understanding how we know that humans left Africa with the archaeology and genetics and such. But I recently read about tracing our lineage back to Africa via language as well. Are you familiar with this study? And perhaps
yes.
you could enlighten us a bit about this?
Yes, I've looked into that paper. I think it was published 2011 in Science.
Yes.
Where people that do linguistics looked into phonemes, which are these distinct units of sound we produce in our languages, and try to trace back the origins of these languages, basically. And they did accomplish this, and they traced back the origins to Africa. The reasoning is similar to the genetic argument. They saw that African languages have the biggest diversity of the phoneme index, which means they've been around for a longer time. Hence, they are the oldest ones, and the languages originate there, as well as humans.
So do you believe in this theory? Do you subscribe to it, or is it still very much controversial in the field?
As far as the linguistics is concerned, I'm not a linguist myself, so I cannot speak for that.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as the genetics and archaeology are concerned, it is pretty sound evidence, yes. What we are unsure of is the particularities and the details of what routes people took out of Africa.
Mm.
Meanwhile, the fossils as well as the DNA tells us clearly that the oldest ancestors were actually in Africa.
Well, we're nearly out of time now, but have you got any final words, perhaps?
I think what I would like to say is that we shouldn't oversimplify these things. As I said, a lot of missing pieces are present, and I think what we also should keep in mind is how we define human might not be as straightforward as it was so far.
Mm-hmm.
Now we know that with the recent finding of Homo naledi and Homo floresiensis, who lived as recently as 12,000 years ago,
My goodness.
shows that there were other ancient hominid species living at the same times as our modern humans, in parallel with us. And some of them, such as the Neanderthals, we know that they had ritualistic behavior as well, which means that they had a higher cognitive capacity than we initially thought.
Sorry, what is the evidence for this this culture and the higher cognitive ability of Neanderthals?
Right.
Is there some evidence we have of that?
So we found an archaeological site in Tashiktosh in Uzbekistan
Oh.
that shows a Neanderthal child buried, but also horns placed around her burial, which seems to show that there was a sort of ritual in burying their dead, which means they were thinking about such things. Such thinking we previously only reserved for our modern humans.
Well, that certainly is some food for thought. Well, sadly, that's all we have time for today. Thank you very much for joining us today, Harry.
Thank you for having me.
That certainly was very interesting. Now, on to the second part of the podcast, 73 Questions with Max. Now, I'm joined here in the studio today with Betty. Betty is from the Middle Paleolithic period, would you believe it? Betty was engineered at the George Church's lab at Harvard. Now, I shan't get into the specifics of the whole ordeal as such, but anyway, where exactly are you from?
You could say I'm from the region of current-day Dhofar, Oman. My family moved all around the place and all the time, but I think from the looks of it from the map, I stayed within the region.
So, do you think your families have migrated from different continents before, do you think? Say, Africa, maybe?
I don't know. All I can say is that I've lived my whole life here. However, my mother has always told me about our great-great-great-grandparents coming from a place far away, a place near a beautiful river. And maybe that might answer your question, but I don't know.
Okay. So, what exactly was your role in your group?
I was a tool maker just like my father. I specialized particularly in weaponry.
What is it like being a toolmaker?
First of all, I love my job, but it's not for everybody indeed. It is such a rigorous job. The strength and energy that goes into creating the precise angle is unimaginable. But, in the end of the day, sharing the meat and the stories of the hunt from my tools makes everything worth it.
Did you do special training?
Definitely. A lot of practice in perfecting my angles and edges. Also, I have this routine of lifting big rocks.
If you could choose your job again, would you choose to be a toolmaker or a hunter, do you think?
Toolmaker without a doubt. Some might say hunting jobs are the best these days, but without tools we make, they're nothing. And we're the ones aiding people's everyday life to improve the quality of their lives.
What was the cutting-edge technology of the time?
When I was still alive, we started to make composite tools. My aunt found this resin that works as an adhesive, and ever since then, my brothers and I would produce stone pieces that would later be hafted on a shaft with it.
So I have with me today a number of artifacts which were found with your remains. Do you recognize any of these?
They are indeed familiar, but I think they seem a little bit glossier and darker than I last remember. Let's see. That piece is mine. so is the piece next to it in the middle. And that big piece is the rock I once struck too hard and ended up with a wrong angle. I thought I would get to it later on and get more out of it, but I guess others after me have done the job.
So what did you hunt using these tools?
Well, the hunters, they took these pieces and they hunted basically every type or sizes of animals that they could find, basically. And, you know, I don't want to brag, but I was particularly proud of this giant cat with dots that we caught. It had such a tasty meat.
How did you make this tool?
I just followed the way my father has taught me. It is what he learned from his father, and you know, and his father learned it from his father, and it has been a secret technique that has been running in my family, and, you know, I just can't share with an outsider like you.
Okay, I won't take any offense from that one. So listeners, since you're obviously not here with us today in the studio, I'm just going to do my best to go and describe these tools to you. So what these tools are is what we call classic Nubian level-wire cores. They are defined by 3 distinct characteristics. Firstly, they have a triangular or sub-triangular shaped core. Secondly, they have a faceted striking platform. And lastly, it is characterized by having a preparation of the median distal ridge on the working surface. This particular Nubian core I have in front of me exhibits a combination of distal and lateral shapings, which we term type 1 and 2. Assemblage like these belonging to the Nubian complex have been found throughout the Nile Valley catchment system and high plateau, and also around the Paleo lakes of Eastern Sahara and the Egyptian Red Sea hills. Although the directionality of the population movement still remains an open question, the prevalence of Nubian tools in southern Arabia provides evidence for demographic connections across the Red Sea.
Hey, anyways, is this tool yours? It seems to have the exact density I want, but I think it just lacks an edge. Could I make it a little bit useful with my hammers?
Please no, Betty. That's my phone. I really do need to have that back, thank you.
Okay, fine, but at least let me take my tools back. They're mine, and I can hear the stones calling for my help.
No, please, Betty. That doesn't belong to me. I'm just borrowing these. Could you just put everything down?
Fine.
So, okay, I'm glad we're over that now. So, could you just tell me, what do you hope to see from your children?
I hope to see a preservation of our tool-making techniques, and because it's a tool-making technique my ancestor passed on to me, and I hope I get to do that to my generation as well.
Well, thank you very much for joining us here today in the studio, Betty, for our 73 Questions with Max. It was lovely to have you, and I wish you all the best. Next with me in the studio for 73 Questions with Max, I have Agatha. Now, Agatha is from the Upper Paleolithic period, would you believe it? So thank you very much for joining us here today, Agatha.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. So, do you think you came from Africa?
Well, I think I came from this earth. I'm native to the soil and the air and the fauna. These concepts you speak of are unfamiliar to me. Yes, we moved around a lot, but it was a matter of acting on instinct and survival, not a matter of labels.
Okay, so where exactly do you call home then?
Definitely what you now call Dhofar in Oman.
How do you use trees in your daily life? What did trees mean to you more specifically?
Trees are good for shade and navigation. We also found this group of trees. When you strip their bark, there's this divine-smelling viscous substance. I've been using it for a while, and it's incredible, but we think that might be a game changer for us.
You could certainly use a little more. So what do you know what frankincense is?
No, I'm not sure what that is. Do you know what it is?
It's too complicated to explain over such a short period of time. So, we noticed that there was an increase in tools made up of materials other than stone in the archaeological record of your time. So, why was stone not good enough to make tools in some instances?
Even though stone often lasts the longest, it wasn't always the easiest to shape. Believe it or not, we made a lot of mistakes when making stone tools, many of which were due to natural fractures in the stones themselves. And since we needed these tools to survive, we started exploring other options, even though we knew stone wasn't really going anywhere. I was told it's kind of like this thing called silicon, which is the stone of your time. You know it's not going anywhere, but it doesn't mean that research on alternative materials isn't being conducted.
So when stone wasn't good enough, what else did you use?
I used bone. Bone was a great alternative. It was more short-term, though. Stone lasted longer.
Interesting. So did you know that some of your cousins in other places in the world were also using bone around the same time as you?
Not really. Well, if I had one of these little machines of yours, maybe I would have. But we only had stone tools, so I haven't heard from my cousins in a while.
Did you recycle tools?
Of course we did. Do you not?
That's a complicated question.
It shouldn't be.
So do you see a good future for your children?
Yes, definitely. This land has given us a lot of opportunities and prosperity, and I think these will last for many generations. And I'm sure this land is still as green and plentiful as it was in my time, but I'm going there to check it out tomorrow.
I wish you all the best in that endeavor. What are you most fearful for of happening in the future?
I'm afraid the next generations will lose their connection to this land and start destroying it. We have a symbiotic relationship with this earth that I fear will turn into a parasitic one.
So, back in the Paleolithic period, did you ever consider leaving Dhofar? And did you think your descendants would ever leave?
We believe in migration and pursuing lands of opportunities, so in many of my years living in Dhofar, my people did encounter times of crisis where we considered leaving. Even though this land has been incredibly generous to us, we never ruled out the possibility of moving, and I don't think our descendants will either.
So could you explain to me what exactly this is?
This is what you now call debitage. The striking platform is straight, and we used hammerstones to make this tool. Slowly, with time, we started adapting better to our environments and developing efficient techniques to make more refined tools than those before us.
Fascinating. So what do you think of what we're doing with DNA sequencing?
Well, I don't know much about it, but if it's important to you to know all these details about the history of these people and places, and DNA sequencing helps you with that, then it's a great tool. But nevertheless, it's important to realize that these stories that have been told and passed on over generations were told for a reason, and perhaps juxtaposing both the scientific and mythical accounts would reveal an even clearer picture of our past.
Well, it seems that we're just about out of time, so I won't be able to go and continue anymore, but thank you so much for joining me today, Agatha. It was an absolute pleasure to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for tuning in to 73 Questions with Max, featured by Moog. Here are some bloopers for you to enjoy, and stay tuned for future episodes.
Well, Harrison Croft, thank you for joining us. I shan't get into the specifics of it. So when stone wasn't good enough, what else did you use?
Well, we used bone. Bones was okay. We used bone.
So, listeners, I'll try to go and describe what I had before me using the terminology and the techniques learnt by science in the Europe and the West. No. Do you think your families have migrated from different continents, perhaps? Say, maybe Africa?
Africa? I'm not sure about the specific, but how would I know? I just lived wherever I was lived. Lived? I was like, whatever, I can't do this.
Well, thank you for that insightful insight.
First language.
Okay.